The desert sun was getting lower in the sky when Ayana spotted something that didn't belong. She had been walking the old trading path for hours, her tall frame casting a long shadow on the sandy ground. At 6 feet and 3 inches, she was taller than most men in these parts, and her presence alone was enough to make travelers think twice about causing trouble. But today, there was no one around to be afraid of her. Just the endless stretch of desert, the occasional cactus, and now this strange sight ahead. A wooden wagon sat tilted to one side, one of its wheels broken and buried in the sand. The horses were nowhere to be seen. Scattered around the wagon were pieces of cloth, broken pottery, and what looked like the remains of someone's belongings. It was clear that whoever owned this wagon had either left in a hurry or met with some kind of trouble. Ayana approached carefully. In her 42 years of life, she had learned that abandoned things in the desert usually meant danger wasn't far behind. She kept her hand near the knife at her side as she got closer to the wreckage. The wagon had clearly been there for a few days. Sand had already started to pile up against its sides, and the wooden planks were beginning to bleach under the harsh sun. She could see that someone had gone through the contents already. Boxes were turned over, their contents spilled out and picked through. Whoever had done this was looking for something valuable. As she walked around the wagon, something caught her eye. Tucked under the back end, partially hidden by a torn piece of canvas, was a large burlap sack. It was the kind of sack traders used to carry grain or other heavy goods. But this one looked different somehow. It was tied shut with thick rope, and it was much fuller than the other scattered items around the wagon. Ayana crouched down and pulled the sack out from under the canvas. It was heavier than she expected, much heavier. As she lifted it, she could feel that whatever was inside had some weight to it. Her mind immediately went to the possibilities. Could it be silver coins? Maybe jewelry or other precious items that the raiders had missed? She shook the sack gently, trying to get a sense of what might be inside. There was definitely something there, but it didn't sound like coins rattling around. It was more like a dull, soft sound. Maybe it was wrapped in cloth to keep it quiet, she thought. Smart traders often did that to hide their most valuable goods. The desert was no place to examine mysterious packages. Ayana knew that whoever had attacked this wagon might still be in the area. She also knew that staying out in the open with something valuable was asking for trouble. Her small camp was about 3 miles away. Hidden in a rocky area where she could examine her find safely, she hoisted the heavy sack onto her strong shoulders. Even with her impressive size and strength, the weight made her work a little harder as she started walking, but the thought of what treasures might be inside kept her moving forward. It had been months since she had found anything of real value, and her supplies were running low. As she walked, Ayana thought about how she would spend whatever riches were in the sack. Maybe there would be enough to trade for a good horse. She had been walking everywhere for too long, and a horse would make her travels much easier. Or perhaps there would be enough silver to buy proper tools, or warm blankets for the coming winter months. The sun continued to sink lower as she made her way across the desert landscape. The sack seemed to get heavier with each step, but she pressed on. She had carried heavier loads before, and the promise of treasure was enough to keep her motivated. About halfway to her camp, she thought she heard something strange. It was very faint, almost like a whisper or a soft cry. She stopped walking and listened carefully, but all she could hear was the wind blowing across the sand and rocks. She decided it must have been her imagination, or maybe just the sound of her own breathing. She shifted the sack to a more comfortable position on her shoulders and kept walking. The weight was definitely challenging, but Ayana had always prided herself on her strength. Growing up, she had been bigger than most of the other children, and as an adult, she could do work that most men found difficult. This sack, whatever it contained, was not going to defeat her. As the sun began to touch the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Ayana finally reached her camp. It was a simple setup, hidden among some large rocks that provided shelter from the wind and prying eyes. She had a small fire pit, a bedroll, and a few basic supplies. It wasn't much, but it was home. She carefully lowered the heavy sack to the ground near her fire pit. Her shoulders ached from carrying the weight, but the excitement of discovery was stronger than any physical discomfort. She gathered some dry wood and started a small fire. As the darkness began to settle over the desert, the flames flickered and danced, casting moving shadows on the rocks around her camp. Ayana sat cross-legged next to the mysterious sack, staring at it in the firelight. The rope that held it closed was tied with several tight knots. Whoever had sealed this sack had wanted to make sure it stayed closed. She pulled out her knife and began working on the knots. They were old and tight, made more difficult by what looked like dried mud or dust that had gotten into the rope fibers. As she worked, she could feel her excitement building. Soon she would know what treasure had been hidden away in this heavy bundle. The first knot came loose, then the second. As she worked on the third and final knot, she thought she heard that strange sound again. This time it was definitely not her imagination. It was coming from inside the sack. A soft, muffled sound that almost sounded like dot, dot. No, that was impossible. It had to be something else. Maybe there was an animal trapped inside, or perhaps the contents were shifting around as the knots came loose. She had heard stories of traders who kept small animals in sacks. Though she couldn't imagine why anyone would do such a thing, the final knot came free, and the rope fell away from the opening of the sack. Ayana took a deep breath and prepared to discover what treasure awaited her inside. The firelight flickered across her face as she reached for the top of the sack, ready to pull it open and reveal the riches that would change her fortunes. She had no idea that what she was about to discover would change her life in ways that had nothing to do with money or material wealth. The heavy burden she had carried across the desert was indeed valuable, but not in any way she could have imagined. As her hands gripped the edge of the sack, ready to pull it open, another soft sound came from inside. This time there was no mistaking what it was. It was definitely not the sound of treasure. Ayana's hands froze at the edge of the sack. That sound from inside was definitely not what she had expected. It was soft, but it was clearly the sound of something alive. Her mind raced through possibilities. Could it be a small animal? Maybe someone had been transporting livestock and one had gotten trapped. She pulled the opening of the sack wider, and immediately her world changed forever. The first thing she saw was a small hand, then another, then a face pale and thin looking up at her with eyes that were both terrified and hopeful. It was a child. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, blinking in the firelight like she hadn't seen light in days, but there wasn't just one child. As Ayana opened the sack wider, she realized with growing shock that there were more. One small form after another began to emerge, like flowers blooming in the desert night. 5 children in total, all girls, all looking like they hadn't eaten in weeks. Oh my ... Ayana whispered, her voice catching in her throat. She had seen many difficult things in her life, but this was something she had never imagined. Someone had stuffed 5 children into a sack like they were grain or supplies. The oldest girl, who looked to be about 12, was the first to climb out completely. She was thin, so thin that Ayana could see her ribs through her torn dress. Her dark hair was matted and dirty, and her eyes held a sadness that no child should ever have to carry. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Water?" Ayana didn't hesitate. She reached for her water pouch and handed it to the girl, who drank deeply before passing it to the younger ones. As each child climbed out of the sack, Ayana felt her heart breaking a little more. They were all in terrible condition, clearly. Having been without proper food or care for many days, the second oldest looked to be about 10, with lighter hair and freckles across her nose. She stayed close to the oldest girl, and Ayana could see they were sisters. They had the same eyes, the same way of moving that spoke of shared experiences and mutual protection. The 3 younger ones appeared to be between 6 and 8 years old. One had bright red hair that would have been beautiful if it had been clean and brushed. Another had dark skin and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around the camp. The youngest had blonde hair in tangled braids and was clutching a small, dirty doll, All 5 children were dressed in what had once been nice clothes, the kind that children from settled towns might wear. But now their dresses were torn, stained, and hung loose on their too thin frames. It was clear they had been traveling for a long time, and not by choice. Ayana found herself staring at them, unable to fully process what she was seeing. She had expected treasure, silver, maybe precious stones. Instead, she had found 5 starving children who had been treated worse than cargo. The weight she had carried across the desert hadn't been riches at all. It had been human suffering. How long? She asked the oldest girl. How long were you in there? The girl's eyes filled with tears. 3 days, maybe 4, we lost count. It was so dark and we were so scared. 3 or 4 days. These children had been trapped in that sack for 3 or 4 days without proper food, water, or air. The fact that they were still alive was nothing short of a miracle. Ayana felt anger rising in her chest, a hot rage at whoever could do such a thing to innocent children. She looked around her simple camp and realized she didn't have nearly enough supplies to care for 5 hungry children. She had a little dried meat, some water, and basic camping gear. It would have to be enough for now. Are you hurt? She asked, kneeling down to be at their eye level. Any of you hurt bad? The children shook their heads, though Ayana could see cuts and bruises on their arms and legs. Nothing appeared to be seriously injured, but they were all clearly weak from hunger and thirst. She went to her small supply bag and pulled out what food she had. It wasn't much, just some dried meat and a few pieces of hard bread, but she divided it equally among the 5 girls. They ate slowly, their bodies probably not used to food after days without it. As they ate, Ayana studied their faces in the firelight. She could see strength there, underneath the fear and exhaustion. These children had survived something terrible, but they were survivors. They had made it through days of darkness and uncertainty, and they were still here. What are your names? She asked softly. The oldest girl looked up from her small piece of bread. I'm Rosa, she said. This is my sister Luna. She indicated the 10-year-old beside her. The others are Bella, Carmen, and little Aina. She pointed to each girl in turn. Ayana nodded, memorizing each name and face. Rosa and Luna, the sisters, Bella with the red hair, Carmen with the dark skin and bright eyes, and Aina, the youngest, still holding tight to her dirty doll. I'm Ayana, she said. And you're safe now. I promise you that. Rosa's eyes searched Ayana's face, looking for truth in her words. The bad men said they were taking us somewhere to work. They said our families sold us because they didn't want us anymore. Ayana felt her anger flare again. That's not true, she said firmly. Nobody sells their children. These were bad men who stole you. Your families are probably looking for you right now. She could see hope flickering in Rosa's eyes, but also doubt. After what these children had been through, it would take time for them to trust anything or anyone again. Where are you from? Ayana asked. What town? San Miguel? Rosa answered. It's 3 days' ride from here, maybe 4. Ayana knew San Miguel. It was a small farming community, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. If 5 children had gone missing, from there the whole town would be in an uproar. She wondered how long ago they had been taken, and whether their families were still searching. As the children finished their small meal, Ayana began to understand the enormous responsibility that had just fallen into her lap. She couldn't just give them some food and send them on their way. They were too young, too weak, and the desert was too dangerous. But she also couldn't keep them at her isolated camp indefinitely. She looked at each small face around her fire, illuminated by the dancing flames. 5 children who had been thrown away like garbage, left to die in the desert. But somehow they had found their way to her. Or maybe she had found her way to them. Get some rest, she told them gently. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you home. As the children curled up near the fire, sharing Ayana's extra blankets, she sat awake wondering what twist of fate had brought them together. She had been looking for treasure, but instead she had found something far more precious and infinitely more complicated. 5 little lives that were now her responsibility, at least until she could find a way to get them back where they belonged. The next morning, as the desert sun began to warm the rocks around their small camp, Ayana watched the 5 children slowly wake up. They stirred carefully as if they weren't sure where they were or whether they were truly safe. She had spent most of the night awake, keeping the fire going and thinking about what needed to happen next. Rosa was the first to sit up completely, immediately looking around to make sure her sister and the other girls were all still there. Even in sleep, she had been protecting them. Ayana could see that this 12-year-old had grown up too fast, forced into a role no child should have to carry. "Good morning," Ayana said softly, not wanting to startle them. "How did you sleep?" "Better than we have in weeks," Rosa replied, helping little Aina sit up. The 6-year-old was still clutching her doll, which Ayana could now see had been a beautiful toy before it became worn and dirty from their ordeal. Ayana shared what remained of her food with the children, watching as they ate slowly and carefully. She could tell they were still hungry, but they were being polite about it. After days of having nothing, even her simple meal of dried meat and bread seemed like a feast to them. As they ate, Ayana gently began asking questions. She needed to understand what had happened to these children, not just for her own curiosity, but to help her figure out the best way to get them home safely. "Rosa," she said carefully, "can you tell me what happened? How did you end up in that sack?" Rosa looked at the other girls as if asking permission to tell their story. When they all nodded, she took a deep breath and began. "It was market day in San Miguel. Mama had sent Luna and me to buy flour and sugar from the trading post. Carmen was there with her grandmother, and Bella was helping her papa sell vegetables. Rosa looked at the youngest girl with sad eyes. Aina was just playing near the fountain with her doll." She paused, taking another small bite of bread before continuing. "There were strangers in town that day. Men with rough voices and mean eyes. They had been drinking at the cantina, and people were staying away from them." Ayana listened carefully, her anger growing as she imagined what was coming next. "We didn't think anything was wrong at first," Rosa continued. "Luna and I were walking home with our purchases when these men came up to us. They said they had candy in their wagon and they wanted to give us some." Carmen, the 8-year-old, with dark skin and bright eyes, spoke up. "My grandmother always told me never to take candy from strangers. But they didn't ask. They just grabbed us." Bella, the red-haired girl, nodded. "I was helping Papa load our wagon when I saw Rosa and Luna being pulled away. I tried to run to get help, but another man caught me. What about you, Anna?" "Hey, Anna?" asked gently, looking at the youngest girl. Anna looked up from her doll with big, sad eyes. "The bad man said he would hurt Rosita if I didn't come with them. He said he would hurt all of them if I made noise." Ayana's heart ached for these children. Even little Aina, at only 6 years old, had been forced to make impossible choices to try to protect her friends. Rosa took over the story again. "They put us in a wagon and covered us with blankets. We drove for a long time, maybe 2 days. They gave us a little water but no food. They said we needed to get used to being hungry because where we were going, nobody cared if children ate or not." "Where were they taking you?" Ayana asked. "They talked about a place called Copper Falls. They said there were mines there where children could work in small spaces that grown-ups couldn't fit into. They said the mine owners paid good money for children who could squeeze into tight places." Ayana felt sick. She had heard stories about such places, where children were forced to work in dangerous conditions, crawling through narrow mine shafts where adults couldn't go. Many children who went into those mines never came out. Luna, Rosa's 10-year-old sister, spoke for the first time that morning. "On the second day, we stopped at a place with other bad men. They were all drinking and arguing about money. Then shooting started." "Shooting?" Ayana asked. Rosa nodded. "The men who took us got into a fight with the other men. There was lots of yelling and gunshots. We were still in the wagon and we were so scared. We thought they might kill us just to get rid of us. Double quotes. Carmen continued the story. "One of our men, the one with the scar on his face, ran back to the wagon. He was bleeding and very angry. He grabbed us and stuffed us into that sack. He was cursing and saying he couldn't be caught with us, Bella added. He said we were evidence of something bad and he had to get rid of us. Rosa's voice became very quiet. He tied the sack closed and threw us into the back of a different wagon. We heard him tell someone to dump us somewhere far away where nobody would find us. The children all fell silent, remembering that terrible moment when they realized they had been abandoned to die. "How long were you in the sack before I found you?" Ayanna asked. "The wagon stopped after a few hours," Rosa said. "Someone threw us out, and we could hear them talking about how heavy we were and how far they would have to carry us. Then they just left us there." Aina spoke up again, her small voice barely audible. "We tried to get out, but the knots were too tight. It was so dark and we got so thirsty." Carmen shared her hair ribbon with us so we could tie our hands together and not get separated in the dark. Ayanna looked at Carmen, amazed by the thoughtfulness of these children even in their darkest moments. That was very smart thinking. "Rosa told us stories to keep us from being too scared," Bella said, "and Luna sang songs. Aina let us all hold her doll when we were the most frightened." These children had taken care of each other through an ordeal that would have broken many adults. They had shared what little they had, comforted each other, and never given up hope. "Did anyone see the men who took you?" Ayanna asked. "Anyone who might be able to help find them?" Rosa shook her head sadly. "It happened so fast. And the grown-ups in town were all busy with market day. By the time anyone realized we were missing, the wagon was already gone." Ayanna stood up and walked a few steps away, needing a moment to process what she had heard. These children had been stolen from their families, sold to mine owners like animals, and then abandoned to die when their captors got into trouble. The cruelty of it made her hands shake with anger, but they were alive. Against all odds, they had survived days in that suffocating sack, and somehow she had found them. Now the question was what to do next. She turned back to the 5 girls, who were watching her with a mixture of hope and fear. They had told her their story, trusted her with their truth. Now they were waiting to see what she would do with that trust. "We're going to get you home," she said firmly, "all of you. Back to your families in San Miguel." "But what if the bad men are still looking for us?" Luna asked, voicing the fear they all carried. Ayanna looked at each small face, these children, who had been through so much but still had the courage to hope. "Then we'll make sure they never find you. I promise you that." She didn't yet know how she was going to keep that promise, but she knew she would find a way. These 5 girls had survived the impossible. Now it was her turn to do the same. After hearing the children's story, Ayanna walked to the edge of her camp and stared out at the desert landscape. The morning sun was getting stronger, and soon it would be too hot to travel, but her mind wasn't on the weather. She was thinking about 5 little girls who had been thrown away like garbage, and about the strange twist of fate that had brought them to her. Ayanna had always been a loner. For the past 8 years, since her world fell apart, she had chosen to live by herself. In the wilderness. She avoided towns, avoided people, avoided anything that might bring back the pain she had worked so hard to bury. But now, sitting around her small fire, were 5 children who needed her help. She turned back to look at them. Rosa was braiding Anna's tangled hair while Luna helped Carmen clean dirt from a small cut on her arm. Bella was trying to repair a tear in her dress using a thorn as a needle. Even after everything they had been through, they were taking care of each other. The sight did something unexpected to Ayanna's heart. It reminded her of another little girl, one with dark hair and bright eyes, who used to sit by their own campfire, chattering about her day while Ayanna braided her hair. That little girl had been taken by fever 8 years ago, along with Ayanna's husband, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly seemed too quiet and too empty. After that loss, Ayanna had promised herself she would never care about anyone again. Caring meant pain when you lost them. It was easier to be alone, to depend only on herself, to not let anyone get close enough to hurt her when they inevitably left. But looking at these 5 children, she felt something stirring inside her that she had thought was dead forever. It wasn't quite love yet, but it was something warmer than the cold indifference she had wrapped around herself like armor. "Miss Ayana?" Rosa's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you okay?" Ayana realized she had been standing there lost in memories for several minutes. "I'm fine," she said, walking back to the fire. "I was just thinking about what we need to do." The truth was, she had no idea what they needed to do. San Miguel was at least 3 days away on foot, possibly 4 with 5 tired children. She didn't have enough food or water for such a journey. She didn't have horses or a wagon. And somewhere out there, bad men might still be looking for these girls. "Are you really going to take us home?" Aina asked, looking up at Ayana with hopeful eyes. Ayana crouched down next to the little girl. Something about Aina reminded her painfully of her own daughter, Isabel. The same age, the same way of tilting her head when she asked questions, the same trust in her eyes. "Yes," Ayana said, surprised by how certain her voice sounded. "I'm going to take you home." But first, she needed to make sure these children were strong enough for the journey. They were all too thin, too weak from their ordeal. They needed food, rest, and time to recover before they could travel safely. Over the next few days, Ayana found herself becoming something she had never expected to be again, a caretaker. She used her knowledge of desert survival to find food and water. She knew which cactus fruits were safe to eat, where to dig for underground springs, and how to catch small animals for protein. She watched as the children slowly began to trust her. At first, they had been polite but cautious, the way children are with adults they don't know well. But as the days passed, they began to relax around her. They started asking questions about the desert, about the plants and animals, about how she knew so much about surviving in the wilderness. Rosa was especially curious. "How do you know all this stuff?" she asked as Ayana showed her which berries were safe to eat. "My husband taught me," Ayana said, the words coming out before she could stop them. It was the first time in years that she had spoken about her family to anyone. "Where is he now?" Luna asked innocently. Ayana felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "He died," she said simply, "a long time ago." The children accepted this information with the matter-of-fact way that children do. They didn't push for more details or offer empty words of comfort. They just nodded and continued listening as she taught them about survival. As the days passed, Ayana found herself softening in ways she had forgotten were possible. When Aina had nightmares about being trapped in the dark sack, Ayana held her until she fell back asleep. When Carmen worried that her grandmother might think she was dead, Ayana assured her that families never stop hoping. When Bella cried because she missed her papa, Ayana sat with her and let her cry without trying to make it stop. The children, in turn, began to bring out parts of Ayana's personality that had been buried for years. She found herself smiling at their questions and jokes. She laughed when they tried to imitate the way she walked or talked. She felt protective of them in a way that was both familiar and terrifying. On the 4th day, as she watched Rosa teaching the younger girls a clapping game, Ayana realized something that shook her to her core. She was starting to care about these children. Really care about them? The thought scared her more than any physical danger ever could. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Ayana sat by the dying fire and tried to understand what was happening to her. For 8 years, she had kept her heart locked away, refusing to let anyone in. She had convinced herself that it was better this way, safer this way. But these 5 little girls were changing everything. She looked at their sleeping faces, peaceful now after days of good food and safety. Rosa had her arm around Luna, even in sleep protecting her little sister. Carmen was curled up next to Aina, and Bella had rolled close to the warmth of the fire. They looked so small, so vulnerable, and yet they had survived something that would have destroyed many adults. Ayana thought about her own daughter, Isabel, and how much she would have liked these girls. Isabel had always wanted brothers and sisters, always begged for playmates. "Mama," she used to say, "our house is too quiet. We need more children to make it happy." Maybe Isabel had been right. Maybe some houses, some hearts were meant to hold more than just 1 or 2 people. Maybe the emptiness Ayana had been carrying for 8 years wasn't meant to stay empty forever. As she banked the fire for the night, Ayana made a decision that surprised her. Tomorrow they would start the journey to San Miguel. She would reunite these children with their families as she had promised. But she was also going to allow herself to care about them during the journey. She was going to let them into her heart, even though it meant risking the kind of pain she had sworn never to feel again. For the first time in 8 years, Ayana went to sleep thinking about something other than her own loneliness. She fell asleep planning how to keep 5 little girls safe on a dangerous journey home. And somehow, despite all her fears, that felt like exactly the right thing to do. The desert wind blew softly across their camp, carrying with it the promise of both challenge and change. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and new decisions, but tonight, a woman who had forgotten how to care was learning to open her heart again, one small girl at a time. On the 5th morning, Ayana woke the children before dawn. The desert was coolest in the early hours, and they would need every advantage they could get for the long journey ahead. She had spent the previous evening preparing for their departure, checking her supplies and planning their route to San Miguel. "Today we start walking home," she announced as the girls rubbed sleep from their eyes. The excitement in their faces was immediate and infectious. Even little Aina, who had been the most frightened of the group, clapped her hands together with joy. But Ayana could also see worry in their expressions, especially in Rosa's eyes. The 12-year-old understood better than the others how dangerous this journey would be. Ayana had been honest with them about the challenges ahead. 3 days of walking through desert and rough country, limited food and water, the possibility that the men who had taken them might still be in the area, and the very real danger that they might encounter other threats along the way. "Remember what we talked about," Ayana said, as she helped them pack their few belongings. "We stay together at all times. If I tell you to hide, you hide immediately and don't come out until I say it's safe. If something happens to me, Rosa knows the way to San Miguel." Rosa nodded seriously. Over the past few days, Ayana had taught her to read the desert signs, to find water, and to navigate by the stars. It was knowledge no 12-year-old should need. But these were not ordinary circumstances. They set out as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. Ayana carried most of their supplies in a pack she had fashioned from pieces of cloth found at the abandoned wagon. The children took turns carrying the water containers, which were made from gourds that Ayana had hollowed out. The first few hours of walking went smoothly. The children were excited to be going home, and their energy carried them forward despite their still weakened condition. Ayana set a steady but gentle pace, stopping frequently to let them rest and drink water. As they walked, she taught them desert survival skills, how to spot the signs of water ahead, which plants could provide shade and which ones to avoid, how to read the wind and sky for weather changes. The children absorbed every lesson eagerly, understanding that this knowledge might save their lives. "Why? Do you live out here all alone?" Carmen asked during one of their rest stops. "Don't you get lonely?" Ayana considered the question carefully. A week ago, she would have said no without hesitation. But these past few days with the children had shown her just how lonely she had actually been. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But the desert is peaceful. And after you've lost people you love, sometimes peace is more important than company." Rosa looked at her with understanding beyond her years. "You lost your family, didn't you, like we almost lost ours?" "Yes," Ayana said simply, "but you didn't lose yours. We're going to make sure you get back to them." By midday, the heat was becoming intense, and they sought shelter under a rocky overhang. As they rested in the shade, Ayana studied the landscape ahead. The terrain was getting more difficult, with rocky hills and narrow passes that could easily hide dangers. "Miss Ayana," Luna said quietly, "what if our families think we're dead? What if they stopped looking for us?" It was a fear that Ayana knew all the children carried, though most of them hadn't voiced it. "Families never stop looking," she said. Firmly, "never. Your mothers and fathers are probably organizing search parties right now. They won't give up until they find you." She hoped she was telling them the truth. A lot depended on how long the children had been missing and whether Anyone in San Miguel had witnessed their kidnapping. But she could see that her words gave them comfort. And sometimes comfort was more important than absolute honesty. As afternoon turned toward evening, they encountered their first real obstacle. The path ahead led through a narrow canyon with high walls on both sides. It was the fastest route to San Miguel, but it was also a perfect place for an ambush. Ayana studied the canyon entrance carefully. She could see tracks in the sand, some fresh, some older. Horses, men on foot, and what looked like wagon wheels. Someone had been using this route recently, and that someone might not be friendly. "We could go around," Rosa suggested, reading the concern on Ayana's face. "That would add a full day to our journey," Ayana replied. "Maybe 2 days." "And we don't have supplies for that long?" It was a difficult decision. Take the risk of going through the canyon, or take the certainty of running out of food and water if they went the long way around. Both choices had dangers. "What do you think we should do?" she asked Rosa. Wanting to hear the girl's opinion, Rosa studied the canyon entrance the way Ayana had taught her, looking for signs of recent activity. "The tracks are at least a day old," she said finally. "And if there are bad people in there, they're probably waiting for traders or travelers with money. They might not expect a woman traveling with children." Ayana was impressed by Rosa's reasoning. The girl was learning to think like a survivor. "You're right," she said. "But we go through carefully and quietly, and if we see or hear anything suspicious, we turn around immediately." They entered the canyon as the sun was beginning to set, moving single file with Ayana in the lead. The walls rose high above them, blocking out most of the remaining daylight. Their footsteps echoed softly off the rock walls, and every small sound seemed amplified in the narrow space. Halfway through the canyon, Aina stumbled and let out a small cry of pain. The sound echoed back and forth between the walls, much louder than it should have been. Everyone froze, listening for any response from ahead or behind. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, they heard something that made Ayana's blood run cold. Voices. Men's voices. Coming from somewhere ahead of them in the canyon. Ayana held up her hand for silence and motioned for the children to move against the wall. They pressed themselves into the shadows, barely breathing as they listened to the voices getting closer. "Double quotes. Told you we should have stayed at the river camp. One voice was saying. Easier pickings here. Another replied. "Traders always use this route?" The voices were getting louder. Soon, whoever was talking would round the bend and see them. Ayana looked around desperately for somewhere to hide 5 children in the narrow canyon, but there was nowhere to go. The voices stopped suddenly, and Ayana realized that the men had heard Aina's cry echoing through the canyon. They knew someone else was in there with them. "You hear that?" One of the voices said, much quieter now. "Yeah, could be an echo from outside. Or could be someone trying to sneak past us." Ayana made a quick decision. She motioned for the children to stay exactly where they were, then stepped out into the middle of the canyon path. If these were dangerous men, better that they see her alone than discover 5 children hiding in the shadows. 2 rough-looking men came around the bend, both carrying rifles. They stopped when they saw Ayana standing calmly in the path, showing no fear despite the weapons pointed at her. Well, the first man said with an unpleasant smile. "What do we have here? Apache woman traveling alone through our canyon." Ayana kept her expression neutral, though her heart was pounding. Behind her, hidden in the shadows, 5 little girls were depending on her to get them through this safely. Everything she had learned about survival, about reading people, about staying alive in dangerous situations would be tested in the next few minutes. "Just passing through," she said calmly. "No trouble intended?" The second man laughed. "No trouble? Lady, you picked the wrong canyon to pass through." Ayana stood perfectly still as the 2 armed men looked her over. She could feel the children watching from the shadows behind her, and she knew that what happened in the next few minutes would determine whether they lived or died. "You got anything valuable in that pack?" the first man asked, gesturing with his rifle toward the bundle on Ayana's back. Just water and a little food, she replied calmly. Nothing worth your time. The second man stepped closer, and Ayana caught the smell of alcohol on his breath. Drunk men with guns were unpredictable, which made them even more dangerous. Maybe we should check for ourselves, he said with a nasty grin. Apache woman might be hiding more than she's saying. Ayana's mind raced through her options. She could try to fight, but two men with rifles would easily overpower her. She could try to run, but that would leave the children exposed. Her only real choice was to try to convince these men that she wasn't worth their trouble. Look, she said slowly, removing her pack and setting it on the ground. Take whatever you want. I'm just trying to get home. The first man kicked at her pack, spilling some of their precious supplies onto the canyon floor. This is all you got? Barely enough food for one person? It was true. After sharing their supplies with 5 hungry children for several days, Ayana's pack contained very little. But that fact might just save their lives. Told you it wasn't worth much, she said, hoping her voice sounded disappointed rather than relieved. The second man was getting impatient. Come on, Jake, she's got nothing. Let's get back to the camp before dark. But Jake wasn't ready to give up yet. Hold on, he said, studying Ayana more carefully. You look familiar. You ever been through Copper Falls? Ayana's blood went cold. Copper Falls was where the men who kidnapped the children had been taking them. If these men were connected to that operation, recognizing her could be deadly for all of them. Never been there, she said truthfully. Jake continued, staring at her. Could swear I seen you somewhere before. From the shadows behind her, Ayana heard the faintest whisper of movement. One of the children was shifting position, probably, trying to get more comfortable against the rocky wall. She prayed the men wouldn't notice. Maybe you saw me in Riverside, she suggested, naming a town in the opposite direction from San Miguel. I trade there sometimes. Yeah, maybe. Jake seemed to be losing interest. You heading to Riverside now? That's right, Ayana lied smoothly. Should be there by tomorrow night. The second man tugged at Jake's sleeve. Come on. We're wasting time. She's got nothing, and Martinez is expecting us back with a report. Jake spat into the dust and shouldered his rifle. Fine, but you, he pointed at Ayana, you better not be lying about where you're going. We don't like people who lie to us. No lies, Ayana said. Just trying to get home. The two men walked past her, heading deeper into the canyon. Ayana forced herself to stand still until their voices faded completely. Only then did she allow herself to breathe normally again. You can come out now, she whispered to the children, one by one. They emerged from the shadows, their faces pale with fear. Little Ana was trembling, and Bella looked like she might be sick. Even Rosa, who had been so brave throughout their ordeal, seemed shaken by how close they had come to disaster. Are they gone? Carmen asked in a tiny voice. Yes, Ayana said, gathering up the supplies that had spilled from her pack. But we need to move quickly. Those men have a camp somewhere, and they might change their minds about letting us go. They hurried through the rest of the canyon as quickly and quietly as possible. When they finally emerged on the other side, the sun was setting, painting the desert in brilliant shades of orange and red. They had made it through the most dangerous part of their journey, but they were all exhausted and shaken. That night, they made camp in a sheltered area between some large rocks. Ayana chose the spot carefully, somewhere they could see anyone approaching, but where their small fire wouldn't be visible from far away. As they shared their meager dinner, the children were unusually quiet. The encounter with the armed men had reminded them all how dangerous their situation really was. I was so scared, Ana finally whispered, voicing what they were all feeling. It's okay to be scared, Ayana told her gently. Being scared means you understand the danger. But you were all very brave back there? You were the brave one, Rosa said. You stood right in front of those bad men to protect us. Ayana looked around at the 5 faces illuminated by their small fire. Over the past week, these children had become more than just people she was helping. They had become important to her in a way that surprised and frightened her. We protect each other, she said simply. That's what families do. The word families hung in the air between them. None of them had planned it, but somehow over the past days they had become a kind of family. Not the traditional kind, but the kind that forms when people take care of each other through difficult times. Over the next 2 days, as they continued their journey toward San Miguel, that sense of family only grew stronger. Ayana found herself thinking less about the pain of her past and more about the present moment with these 5 remarkable children. Rosa continued to show leadership beyond her years, helping the younger girls and learning everything Ayana could teach her about survival. Luna revealed a gift for singing that kept their spirits up during the hardest parts of the journey. Carmen showed remarkable strength for such a small girl, never complaining even when she was obviously tired. Bella's cheerful personality helped keep everyone's mood positive. And little Aina, despite being the youngest, proved to be incredibly observant, often spotting things the others missed. In return, the children taught Ayana things she had forgotten. How to laugh at simple jokes. How to find wonder in small things, like a beautiful sunset or an interesting rock formation. How to hope for good things instead of always expecting the worst. On their final night before reaching San Miguel, as they sat around their small fire sharing stories, Aina crawled into Ayana's lap. "I wish you could be my mama," the little girl said quietly. Ayana felt her heart clench. "You already have a mama, sweetheart, and she loves you very much." "I know," Aina said, "but I love you too. Can I have 2 mamas?" Before Ayana could answer, Rosa spoke up. "Miss Ayana, what will you do after you take us home? Will you stay in San Miguel?" It was a question Ayana had been trying not to think about. Tomorrow she would return these children to their families, and then what? Go back to her lonely life in the desert? Pretend that the past week had never happened? "I don't know," she said honestly. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "You could stay," Luna suggested hopefully. "You could live in town and be part of our family?" Carmen nodded enthusiastically. "My grandmother always says there's room in our house for anyone who needs a place." Bella joined in, "And my papa would give you work at his farm. He's always saying he needs help with the heavy lifting." Ayana looked at their hopeful faces and felt something inside her chest that she had thought was broken forever. These children had given her something precious. They had shown her that it was possible to care about people again without being destroyed by the caring. "We'll see," she said softly. "Tomorrow we focus on getting you home safely. Then we'll figure out what comes next." As the children settled down to sleep for their last night on the journey, Ayana stared up at the stars and wondered if it was possible for a heart that had been closed for 8 years to truly open again. She was about to find out. Tomorrow would bring them to San Miguel, where she would have to say goodbye to 5 little girls who had changed her life forever. But tonight, under the vast desert sky, they were still together, still a family of choice forged in adversity and sealed with love. The morning of their arrival in San Miguel dawned clear and bright. Ayana woke early and watched the sun rise over the desert, knowing that this would be the last sunrise she would share with the 5 children who had become so important to her. In a few hours they would reach the town, and her responsibility for their safety would end. The children were unusually quiet as they prepared for the final stretch of their journey. Even Aina, who was normally chatty in the mornings, seemed subdued. They all understood that today would bring changes none of them were quite ready for. "Are you excited to see your families?" Ayana asked as they began walking. "Yes," Rosa said, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm Ayana expected. "But I'm also scared." "Scared of what?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "What if they're different now? What if we're different? What if everything has changed too?" "Much?" It was a wise question from a 12-year-old who had been through more than most adults ever would. Ayana understood Rosa's fear. Trauma changed people, and these children had experienced something that would mark them forever. "Change isn't always bad," Ayana said gently. "Sometimes we change in ways that make us stronger." As they walked the final miles to San Miguel, Ayana found herself dreading their arrival almost as much as the children seemed to. Over the past week, she had discovered parts of herself that she thought were gone forever. She had learned to care again, to hope again, to believe that good things were possible. The thought of returning to her solitary life in the desert felt hollow and wrong. They reached the outskirts of San Miguel just after midday. It was a small farming community, much like dozens of others scattered across the territory. Adobe houses with red tile roofs lined dusty streets. Gardens and small farms surrounded the central plaza, where a few shops and the church served the local population. As they walked down the main street, people began to notice them. At first, just curious glances at the tall Apache woman traveling, with 5 young girls. But then recognition began to dawn on faces throughout the town. Carmen! An elderly woman rushed out of one of the houses, her face a mixture of joy and disbelief. Carmen, is that really you? Carmen broke away from the group and ran into the woman's arms. Grandmother, I'm home. The grandmother held Carmen tightly, tears streaming down her weathered face. My child, my precious child, we thought... we feared... She couldn't finish the sentence. Within minutes, word had spread throughout the small town. People emerged from their houses and shops, calling out names and searching faces. Ayana watched as Luna ran to a man and woman who had to be her parents, and as Bella was swept up in the arms of a tall man with red hair just like hers, but she also noticed something that made her heart sink. Rosa and Aina stood close together, looking around hopefully, but no one came running to claim them. The excitement in the plaza was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to know where the children had been, how they had survived, who had brought them home. Ayana found herself surrounded by grateful adults, all talking at once and trying to thank her for rescuing their daughters. Please, she sighed, raising her voice above the crowd. The children need rest and food. They've been through a terrible ordeal. The town doctor, an older man with kind eyes, stepped forward. She's right. Let me examine them first, make sure they're healthy. Then there will be time for all your questions. As the doctor began checking each child, Ayana noticed Rosa and Ena still standing apart from the reunions happening around them. She approached the girls quietly. Where are your families? She asked Rosa, Rosa's eyes filled with tears. I don't see them. Maybe they're not here. Maybe they... She couldn't finish the thought. Before Ayana could respond, a middle-aged woman approached them hesitantly. Excuse me, she said softly. Are you Rosa and Aina Martinez? Rosa nodded, hope flickering. In her eyes, the woman's face crumpled with grief. I'm your Aunt Sophia. I'm so sorry, children, your parents. There was an accident shortly after you disappeared. A fire at your house. They didn't make it out. The words hit Rosa and Aina like physical blows. Aina began to cry, not fully understanding but sensing the finality in the woman's voice. Rosa went very still, her face pale with shock. We're orphans, Rosa whispered. Aunt Sophia knelt down beside them. You're not alone, I'm family, but... She hesitated, looking uncomfortable. I have 6 children of my own, and my husband is sick. I don't know how I can take care of 2 more. Ayana felt anger rising in her chest. These children had survived kidnapping, abandonment, and a dangerous journey home, only to discover they had no real home to return to. What happens to them? Ayana asked. Aunt Sophia looked even more uncomfortable. There's an orphanage in the next county. It's not ideal, but they take children who have nowhere else to go. An orphanage? Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. Ayana had heard about these institutions. Children packed into overcrowded buildings, given just enough food and clothing to survive, but little love or individual attention. After everything Rosa and Aina had been through, the thought of sending them to such a place was unbearable. The town doctor finished his examinations and announced that all 5 girls were healthy, though still somewhat undernourished. The reunited families began making plans to take their daughters home for proper meals and rest, but Rosa and Aina stood quietly with their aunt, who clearly loved them but just as clearly couldn't provide for them. When would they have to go to the orphanage? Ayana asked. Within the week, Aunt Sophia said sadly. I can keep them that long, but no longer. I'm sorry. I wish things were different. Ayana watched as the other three girls said goodbye to Rosa and Aina. Carmen hugged them tightly, promising to visit. Bella gave Aina her own hair ribbon as a keepsake. Luna sang a soft song that had comforted them all during their journey, but it was clear that despite their promises, the daily demands of family life would soon pull the other girls back into their normal routines. Rosa and Aina would be alone. Again, except this time it would be permanent. That evening, Ayana sat in the town's small inn, staring at the ceiling and trying to decide what to do. The sensible thing would be to leave in the morning. She had done what she promised. She had brought the children home safely. It wasn't her responsibility to solve every problem in their lives, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Aina's tear-stained face and Rosa's expression of quiet desperation. These two girls had become part of her heart over the past week. The thought of walking away and leaving them to face an uncertain future alone made her feel sick. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Rosa standing in the hallway, holding Aina's hand. "Miss Ayana," Rosa said quietly, "can we talk to you?" Ayana let them into her small room, and they sat together on the narrow bed. "We heard Aunt Sophia talking to her husband," Rosa said. "They can't afford to keep us. And the orphanage. We heard stories about it when we lived here before. It's not a good place. What are you asking me?" Ayana said. Though she already knew, Aina looked up at her with those trusting eyes that reminded Ayana so much of her own lost daughter. "Could we stay with you? We know you like being alone, but we wouldn't be any trouble. Rosa is really good at cooking and I can help with chores. We could be your family," Rosa added hopefully. "If you want us?" Ayana felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. For 8 years, she had protected herself from this kind of pain by refusing to care about anyone. But these two girls had already broken through her defenses. They had shown her that love didn't always lead to loss, that sometimes it led to something beautiful and worth the risk. "It wouldn't be easy," she said slowly. "Living in the desert is hard, and I don't know much about raising children anymore." "We don't need easy," Rosa said. "We just need someone who cares about us." Aina nodded eagerly. "And you already taught us how to live in the desert? We're good at it now." Ayana looked at these two brave, resilient girls who had survived more hardship than most people face in a lifetime. They weren't asking for luxury or comfort. They were asking for love and a place to belong. The choice should have been impossible. She had spent 8 years learning to live alone, convincing herself that solitude was safer than caring. But as she looked at Rosa and Aina, she realized that some choices aren't really choices at all. They're just the heart finally admitting what it has known all along. "Pack your things," she said quietly. "We'll leave in the morning." The smiles that lit up their faces were worth every risk, every fear, every possibility of future heartbreak. Ayana had found her treasure after all. But it wasn't silver or gold. It was something far more valuable. It was family. 6 months later, Ayana stood in the doorway of her new home, watching Rosa teach Aina how to braid rope from desert grass. The house was small but sturdy, built on a hill overlooking San Miguel. From here, they could see the town below while still maintaining the privacy and independence that Ayana valued. The past half year had been full of changes, challenges, and unexpected joys. After deciding to adopt Rosa and Aina, Ayana had faced the reality that her old life of complete solitude was no longer possible. Two growing girls needed stability, education, and connection to a community. They needed more than just survival skills. So she had made a compromise that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of returning to her isolated desert camp, she had chosen to build a new life on the outskirts of San Miguel. Close enough to town for the girls to attend school and maintain friendships, but far enough away to preserve their independence and safety. The people of San Miguel had initially been suspicious of the tall Apache woman who had brought their children home. But as months passed and they saw how well Rosa and Aina were thriving under her care, suspicion had gradually turned to respect and acceptance. Ayana had used her knowledge of the desert to establish herself as a guide and scout. for trading caravans. Her reputation for safety and reliability had spread quickly, and she now had more work than she could handle. The income allowed her to provide for Rosa and Aina while still maintaining her self-sufficiency. "Mama Ayana," Aina called out using the name she had started calling her after the adoption was made official. "Look, I made a whole basket." Ayana smiled at the slightly lopsided basket in Aina's hands. "It's beautiful, little one." "Much better than my first attempt." The word mama still caught in Ayana's throat sometimes. For so many years she had been nobody's mother. Learning to fill that role again, with two girls who had their own trauma to heal from, had been both challenging and rewarding. Rosa, now 13, had shown remarkable resilience. She still had nightmares sometimes about their ordeal, but she had also discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. She had become fluent in English and Spanish, excelled in her studies, and was already talking about becoming a teacher herself someday. Aina, at 7, had recovered from their traumatic experience with the natural resilience of childhood. She laughed easily, made friends quickly, and had only grown more affectionate and trusting over time. She no longer clung to her tattered doll, having outgrown the need for that particular comfort. "The supply wagon should be here soon," Rosa said, looking down toward the main road. "Mr. Peterson said he'd bring those new books you ordered." Ayana had insisted that both girls receive a proper education, something that was challenging in a small frontier town. She supplemented their school learning with books ordered from larger cities, and she had even convinced the local teacher to expand the curriculum to include more advanced subjects. As they watched, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, signaling the approach of travelers. But as the cloud got closer, Ayana could see it wasn't the expected supply wagon. It was a group of riders moving fast, and something about the way they rode triggered her survival instincts. "Girls," she said calmly. "Inside the house, now." Rosa immediately understood the tone and grabbed Aina's hand. They had practiced this many times over the past months. If there was ever danger, they knew exactly what to do and where to go. Ayana watched as 5 men on horseback approached her. Property. They rode with the confident swagger of people who were used to taking what they wanted. As they got closer, she recognized the leader. It was Jake, one of the men they had encountered in the canyon months ago. Well, Jake called out as he reined in his horse. "Look what we found. The Apache woman who lied to us about where she was going." Ayana kept her expression neutral, though her hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the doorframe. "You're on my property," she said calmly. "State your business or move on." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Your property? Since when do Apache have property?" "Since I bought it legally and have the papers to prove it," Ayana replied. She had made sure all the legal aspects of her new life were in perfect order. One of the other men spoke up. "We heard you got yourself some children. That true?" Ayana's blood went cold. Why would these men be interested in Rosa and Aina? Then she remembered something that made her stomach drop. These men had mentioned Copper Falls, the place where the girls' kidnappers had been taking them. If these men were connected to that operation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Jake dismounted and took a step closer. "See, here's the thing. We lost some valuable property a while back. 5 little girls who were supposed to bring us good money. Someone helped them disappear. And we heard," another man added, "that you showed up in town with 5 children, claiming you found them in the desert." Ayana realized with growing horror that these men weren't here by coincidence. Someone had been watching, asking questions, putting pieces together. The children they had saved from the sack were still being hunted. "Those children were returned to their families months ago," she said truthfully. "All of them?" Jake asked, with a knowing smile. "We heard different. We heard 2 of them didn't have families to go back to. We heard you kept them." From inside the house, Ayana could hear the faint sound of Rosa and Aina moving around. Following their practiced emergency plan, they would be hiding in the root cellar by now. But if these men decided to search the house... "Like I said," Ayana repeated, "I don't know what you're talking about." Jake's expression hardened. "Maybe we should take a look around. Make sure you're telling the truth." You're not welcome here, Ayana said, stepping sideways to put herself directly between the men in the front door. I suggest you leave now, or what? Jake sneered. You'll stop all five of us by yourself? Ayana didn't respond with words. Instead, she smoothly picked up her rifle and checked to make sure it was loaded. The action was casual, but the message was clear. The other men shifted nervously in their saddles. They had expected to intimidate a lone woman, not face someone who was clearly prepared to fight. Now hold on, one of them said. We don't want any trouble. But Jake was too proud to back down. Woman, you're making a mistake. We know those girls are here, and we're going to take them back where they belong. Over my dead body, Ayana said quietly. For a moment, the confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. 5 armed men against 1 woman with a rifle. The odds were terrible, but Ayana had 2 things on her side: the high ground and absolute determination. To protect her children, the standoff was broken by the sound of galloping horses. Another group of riders was approaching fast, and these were coming from the direction of town. As they got closer, Ayana could see Sheriff Martinez leading a group of men from San Miguel. Jake and his men saw them too. Their confident expressions began to change as they realized they were now outnumbered. Problem here, Ayana? Sheriff Martinez called out as he and his men surrounded Jake's group. These men were just leaving, Ayana replied, never taking her eyes off Jake. The sheriff looked at the armed men, then at Ayana, standing ready to defend her home. That right? You boys just passing through? Jake realized he had lost the advantage. Facing one woman was one thing, but taking on the sheriff and half the town was another matter entirely. No problem here, he said, remounting his horse. Just got lost, looking for the main road. Main road's that way, the sheriff pointed, and I suggest you take it. This is a peaceful community, and we like to keep it that way. As Jake and his men rode away, Ayana felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, but she knew this wasn't over. Someone was still looking for Rosa and Ana, and they wouldn't give up easily. Sheriff Martinez approached after the men had disappeared. Ayana, those weren't just random drifters. They were asking questions about you and the girls in town yesterday. I figured as much, she replied. Any idea who they were working for? Nothing I can prove yet, but I'll send word to the territorial marshal. If they're connected to child trafficking, it's a federal matter. That evening, after Rosa and Ana had emerged from their hiding place and heard the story, they sat together around their dinner table discussing what to do next. Maybe we should move away, Rosa suggested. Go somewhere far away where no one knows us, Ayana considered this. It would certainly be safer. But it would also mean starting over again, leaving behind the community they had worked so hard to become part of. Or, she said slowly, we could stay and fight. Make it clear that anyone who threatens our family will have to deal with the whole town. Ana looked confused. The whole town? Think about it, Ayana explained. Sheriff Martinez didn't come alone today. He brought help because people here care about what happens to us. We're not alone anymore. It was true. Over the past months, they had become part of something larger than just their small family. The people of San Miguel had accepted them, and more than that, they had come to value what Ayana brought to their community. The next day, word spread through town about the confrontation. By evening, a steady stream of visitors had come to check on them and offer support. Carmen's grandmother brought a pot of stew. Bella's father